That's exactly what I meant. This is the lecture for Wednesday, the 24th of March, 2021, for European history. It is the last lecture before your exam. So, Rasputin is dead, and the Tsar has been compelled by, believe it or not, railroad workers to abdicate from his throne and place himself in the hands of whatever new Russian government is set up. The Russian Republic promises to continue the war, but at the same time that the Russian Republic is born, the Petrograd Soviet of workers, peasants, soldiers, and sailors is also born. The Petrograd Soviet insists on sending delegates called commissars to every factory, farm that they can, and to every military unit and ship. And by doing so, son of a Seabiscuit. And by doing so, I'll get back to that later. Establish some form of veto power over the normal chain of command. And what that means is that the commissar has to sign off if factory's going to do overtime, or if the production system is going to change. Please take any non-uniform tops off. Or if a ship is going to leave port and go to sea and take a patrol. The commissars, by having this veto power, established the Petrograd Soviet as a shadow government, which actually in many ways has more authority than the so-called Russian Republic. The Germans send a communist virus and inject it in a sealed train into the body politic of Russia. In 1917, during the time of the Republic, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, younger brother of one of the men who assassinated Tsar Alexander II, who freed the serfs, and who is the leader of the Bolshevik faction of the Communist Party of Russia, he was called by his socialist enemies our Robespierre. Not a good thing. Lenin and others are given the opportunity to gather in Switzerland and to travel on a train that is sealed. There'll be no contact between you communists and our railroad workers or anyone else. But if you agree, we can get you into Russia. And that's agreed. And the Germans send Lenin to Russia, like trying to infect it with communism. Well, it kind of works for a while. And then Germany regrets it about 30 years later. The idea is that when Lenin arrives, the Petrograd Soviet welcomes him, but they're also a little afraid. In July of 1917, Lenin tries to get the Bolsheviks to lead a revolution, lead the Petrograd Soviet into revolution against the Republic, and it's premature. They fail. The army actually steps in and protects the Republic from the Soviet. So this places the army in a strong position. The government has had to use the army to protect it. So the army sees its chance to try to deal with this weak government that's kowtowing to the Petrograd Soviet. So the leader of Russia's Stavka, General Kornilov, leads troops to St. Petersburg to try to destroy the Soviets and take over the government. However, revolutionary agitators meet the troops peacefully as they're moving towards St. Petersburg. These revolutionary agitators convince a critical mass of troops in each unit to just go home. So Kornilov doesn't have soldiers. So there's no military takeover. The agitators were Bolsheviks, Bolshevik communists, working for Lenin, primarily. So now everyone is waiting for the Bolsheviks to do their thing. And in October or November, October old style, November new style, the Bolsheviks take over in a fairly bloodless coup in St. Petersburg and later around the center of the country. The Bolsheviks establish a government. This is the first communist government in human history. And they've got to somehow fulfill their promise of peace, bread, and land. So the first thing they do, aside from try to maintain control every day, day by day, is they contact the German High Command and set up peace negotiations. At the city of Brest-Litovsk, near the Pripyat marshes between Poland and White Russia, or Belarus, the German High Command and the Bolsheviks, led by Trotsky, negotiate. And the Germans want Ukraine, which is the massive area north of the Black Sea, which is part of Russia. They want Bessarabia, which is now Moldova, which is at that time part of Russia. They want Poland, which at that time is part of Russia. And they want the Baltic states just west of St. Petersburg all the way to the East Prussian border, which is also has been part of Russia. At first, Trotsky tries to say, no, you're asking for too much. And the Germans say, our troops are already occupying these areas. What are you going to do, keep fighting? And Trotsky says, no, we will wage neither war nor peace. And he leaves. The Germans advance 10 miles, 20 miles a day for the next few days until Trotsky comes back and says, okay, we agree to your terms. Neither war nor peace is not an option with the German High Command. They'll just take everything if you let them. So at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Germany gets massive territories in Europe, in Eastern Europe, which includes much of the area that the Soviets lost after World War II. I'm sorry, after the Cold War. Ukraine, Moldova, not so much Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. And Finland. Finland also is going to be independent. So the Germans are going to get their massive numbers of troops to go west and make the St. Michael offensive happen. And that, I think, is where we're going to leave Russia. We'll come back to it when we tell the story of totalitarianism as it grows in Russia. Any questions on Russia or its situation before we finally go to America? Heck yeah. I see no questions. Okay. The United States before World War I is not the power that it is today. It is, however, an incredible industrial economy. It's right up there with Germany and Britain as one of the leading steel producers in the world. The United States dominates the Western Hemisphere. We have a Navy that's growing in power and strength. We, after 1899, have an empire that includes the Philippines, Guam, Samoa, American Samoa, Hawaii, Panama, the Panama Canal Zone anyway, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we're overlooking Cuba and its republic. And that's, I think I'm probably leaving out a couple of things, but basically, the U.S. has arrived on the world stage. We're a great power. We're not a superpower. We also, while we have a big Navy, have a tiny little army. And when Columbus, New Mexico is attacked by Francisco Pancho Villa, a Mexican Civil War general, our active duty forces, while we are able to enter Mexico without any difficulty, can't find him. We can't bring him to ground. We can't punish him. When war is going to be declared, we are going to have to build basically an entirely new army. And we do so. But it takes us about a year and a quarter. Do Americans want to get involved in the war? Well, some do. Again, had the 1912 election gone differently, President Theodore Roosevelt in his third term would certainly have had us declare war on Germany within the first few months if Congress had gone along, and World War I might have been over in 1916. But that didn't happen. Still, there were a lot of Americans who saw the Kaiser and his Germany as a threat to world peace and as a danger to the world. But conversely, there were also many people who really didn't want us to side against Germany on Britain's side. Irish Americans hate the British Empire at that time because the British Empire controls Ireland. And a lot of people of Irish descent came here in order to avoid being stuck fighting England's wars. There are also massive numbers of German American immigrants in the center of our country, Milwaukee, say, but all over the Midwest, including this part of the country. And they still have, at the very least, cultural and emotional ties to the fatherland. The Germany of World War I is not the Germany of World War II. It's not Hitler. The Kaiser has his problems, but he's not a genocidal, totalitarian dictator. Far from it. So, do we need to take our peaceful, isolationist country into a European war? And what is increasingly obvious isn't just a normal war, it's a frickin' meat grinder. Are we willing to feed young American lives into that meat grinder? Are we willing to do to our boys what the British, French, and Germans are doing to their boys? Which is sending them to the hell of being cut to pieces or being shot to pieces. So the country is divided. In 1914, the Germans go through Belgium. The British go to war over that. A lot of Americans who were on the fence are no longer on the fence. The Germans violated a little country's neutrality in order to get a battlefield advantage. That's scuzzy. So anti-German feeling is stoked by Germany's actions in Belgium. Then, in 1915, the Lusitania is sunk with hundreds of Americans on board. It sunk without warning off the Irish coast, and again, hundreds of Americans are killed. So President Wilson protests, and after other sinkings, the Germans back off from unrestricted submarine warfare. They do this because they don't want the United States to get involved in the war. The problem is that Germany's only real road to victory, aside from having sudden triumph on the Western Front in the trenches, is to starve Britain into submission. So how can Germany do this but for unrestricted submarine warfare? To say to the world, if you sail anywhere within our exclusion zone around Britain, your ship is liable to be sunk without warning, which is barbaric. But they've held off for a while. Wilson runs for re-election, and in another three-way race, Wilson wins on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." What a guy. So, Wilson is reelected on an anti-war pledge. But about the same time, the Germans get desperate again and resume unrestricted submarine warfare. But they understand in early 1917 that if they do this, the United States may very well get involved. So what to do? How can Germany counter America if the United States gets involved in World War I over what they need to do, which is sink food ships on their way to Britain? If we look at old maps, we see that Mexico used to be a lot bigger in the north than it is now because of the Mexican War of the 1840s or 50s. What if Foreign Minister Zimmermann of the German Empire says to himself, "What if we contact the Mexicans who are having a civil war and offer them Arizona, New Mexico, parts of California, parts of Texas. In fact, we could offer them more, all of California or all of Texas. We could, as Germans, even if the Mexicans lose at the peace treaty, demand that Mexico be enlarged at the United States' expense, give them back their territories." So Zimmermann sends this message. The only way he can, by telegraph, by telegram. The only telegraph lines that cross the world by going under the oceans were laid by the British, are operated by the British. Now, the British don't close down Germany's communications, but they monitor them. So the Germans use a series of codes. And if you know anything about cryptography, you know that codes are very hard to break. That's why they're codes. The Germans trust that their diplomatic code is unbreakable. So, Foreign Minister Zimmermann sends a telegram to the Mexican authorities offering them the desert southwest of the United States in return for Mexico declaring war on the U.S. and making trouble for the U.S. if the U.S. declares war on Germany. On a British telegraph line. The British can read Germany's diplomatic mail. The British translate this and go, ooh ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha, and give it to President Wilson. And also sneak it to the American press. They do this because Wilson should do something about this. This is Germany literally offering to carve the United States up like a roast turkey if the U.S. is stupid enough, brave enough, whatever, to fight Germany. This is some really heinous stuff. But the British also understand that Wilson is slippery, and he may want to de-emphasize this. So the British release it to Wilson and sneak it to the press. When the press get a hold of it, it's too late. Unrestricted submarine warfare pushes the U.S. to the brink of war, but a lot of people misinterpret that and say that it's unrestricted submarine warfare alone that brings the U.S. into war. No, it's the Zimmermann telegram. It is the German offer to bring Mexico massive sections of American territory in return for Mexican involvement in the war. So Wilson asks for a declaration of war, and Congress, for the most part, not overwhelmingly, by the way. There are a lot of anti-war votes, but Wilson, for the most part, gets a solid set of majorities in the House and the Senate, and we go to war. But it's going to take time for our troops to get there. Now, early on, our field commander, General John J. Blackjack Pershing, arrives with his command staff on a French dock. The press is there to meet him, and famously he says, "Lafayette, we are here." What's that a reference to?
In the American and French revolutions, when the Americans promised that they would help the French with their revolution because the French helped the Americans. But then they kind of just didn't because of money and economy.
Well, and also, the French were still a world power and we were just starting out. It would have been kind of suicide. But yes, there was all of that. Lafayette, Marquis de Lafayette, came to this country when we were still rebelling colonies and helped train Washington's forces. He was a very young guy, French aristocrat, but he knew military drill. And he and the Baron von Steuben helped train up American line units to fight the British in European-style open field battles. As Mr. Heaton says, when the French Revolution began, before it got bloody and Committee of Public Safety, the Marquis de Lafayette was hoping that we would aid the middle-class forces in the French Revolution against foreign interference and even against British interference. But we didn't. There were reasons for that. But a lot of people who were Francophiles thought that it was a betrayal. Also, we did owe something to the Marquis de Lafayette. So Pershing saying that Lafayette, we are here, is a resonant statement. It's a statement deep in history, and it basically says we're here to pay off America's debt to France, because France helped us become an independent republic. Big deal. That is a big deal. Wilson, for his part, had offered the 14 points. Wilson's 14 points were a blueprint for peace without victory. It was a blueprint for a generous peace with Germany. A victorious peace, but still a generous peace. So Wilson's 14 points are going to be important because when the war is lost, the Germans are going to actually expect Wilson to convince the other allies to do a generous peace with Germany, sort of like the British did in the Boer War. Spoiler alert. That's not what happens. Wilson famously says that we are fighting to make the world safe for democracy. In other words, men like Kaiser Wilhelm, militarists like the Germans and the Prussians, European wars, all of this stuff are silly. And they threaten the people's governments of genuine democracies like ours. So we're going to stick it to the militarists until every militarist in the world, somebody who's a warmonger, understands that the United States will not stand by and allow aggression to occur. So Wilson, very early on, is implying that America is going to be much more involved in the world than it was before in order to prevent threats from democracy. But the most famous quote of Wilson's is that this will be the war to end all wars. Oh. It starts a cycle of wars that travel through the 20th century and to the present day. Everything that's major in world history since World War I is a direct or indirect result of World War I. So unfortunately, it is the war to end all peace. But Wilson doesn't know that. He's an idealist. In any event, America gets involved with the war, and we help turn the tide against the Germans, and we ultimately win. Tomorrow you're going to have your exam. But in addition to that, because I don't think the exam is going to take the whole period, and I don't think correcting it's going to take the whole period, what I will try to do is have as much work back to you as I can that you can correct. In other words, quizzes and exams will be prioritized so you can correct them and get wrong answers right for half credit. So that by 3 p.m. tomorrow, you can get me as much as you can to improve your grade. That's my deadline, 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Everything needs to be in. So tomorrow you're going to take the exam, we'll correct the exam, and hopefully you will have time enough in class to improve some grades when you get work back. Yeah.
So the exam tomorrow is mainly just covering like all of this World War
I.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what it is. And it's because the rest of, well, I didn't want to have a vacation go by without testing you on what we would cover. So that's the deal. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a few relevant film clips. Not the song. And you at home, I'll have those film clips online.